Zero scandal within the Trump family is reminiscent, for me, of the zero wars of the Trump presidency.
Aside from what you just saw being blatantly untrue, I mean, even the staunchest Trump supporter would admit that Trump is no stranger to familial scandals. What Mr. Peterson is exhibiting here is Olympic-level glazing. He's doing tricks on it.
The bombastic Donald J.
But this video is not about Jordan. It's about the misguided sentiment he and many Trump supporters parrot, that Trump is anti-war. Now, this is a wholly untenable position to defend, so some Trump fans have now moved the goalpost to saying there were no new wars under Trump. In this video, we'll go over why that saying is nothing more than a dishonest slogan that can be made to apply to even the fiercest warmongers, and also how Trump is not only not anti-war, but in many instances he outperforms notorious neocon warhawks. So let's get into it. As I mentioned earlier, no new wars is nothing more than a meaningless slogan that doesn't deserve more than a minute of serious discussion. Neither Biden, Obama, nor Clinton declared war, but I'd say, and I'm sure most Trump fans would agree, they're still warhawks. From Clinton's bombing of the Al-Shifa pharmaceutical plant in Sudan for the supposed reason that the plant had ties with terrorists, when it didn't, it was just manufacturing medical products, to Biden's gleeful aiding of Netanyahu, both financially and ideologically, as the Israeli regime continues to violate international law. Oh, and who can forget Obama's trigger finger when it came to drone strikes? Keep this in mind because it comes up again soon. So if your defense of Trump is that he never formally declared war on another country, I have some news for you. Formal declarations of war are very rare. The last time America formally declared war was during World War II. The US war machine gets around having to formally declare war in many ways, one of which is by issuing authorizations for use of military force, or AUMFs. This is what happened in Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan. AUMFs allow for the US military to involve itself in a region, and the AUMF over Iraq remained in place from 2002 to 2021. Meaning, although Trump never started a new war, he, like his predecessor, oversaw the AUMF in Iraq, never ended it, and actually used it to justify an airstrike of an Iranian target in Iraq. The AUMF over Iraq was only repealed during the Biden presidency in 2021 after a bipartisan effort by the House. Now don't get me wrong, just because Iraq wasn't a formal declaration of war does not mean we should avoid calling it what it was. An unjust war perpetrated by war hawk George Bush and his cabinet full of neocons, which Trump was in favor of. I bring this up not to downplay these warmongers, but to highlight how arbitrary this topic can be and how sneaky the American empire is when it comes to euphemizing their actions. Instead of declaring war, they issue something technical sounding like an AUMF, but just because the US didn't formally declare war under Trump or Biden or Obama or even Bush, does not absolve these men of their hawkish malevolence. Being the leader of an imperial force, especially the US, almost always means inheriting wars and conflicts. But the test of a principled anti-war candidate is how they de-escalate, make amends, and successfully withdraw from those conflicts. Speaking of Bush-era warhawks, what have they been up to? Oh yeah, that's right, Trump recruited them for his own cabinet. Shit. Men like John Bolton and Mike Pompeo. This is obviously something a staunch anti-war advocate would do. While we're still on the topic of the war in Iraq, we should probably mention how Trump pardoned the Blackwater war criminals. To briefly fill you in, back in 2007, private war contractors from the company Blackwater, yes, this is a real thing, another wonderful outgrowth of neoliberal capitalism where, instead of just using that thing called the army that you pay for, governments can contract out private militaries to get in on the fun. Anyway, 4 Blackwater guards opened fire on a crowd in Baghdad, killing over a dozen civilians, including children. This was called the Nisar Square Massacre, and it wasn't even committed by the US military, just some private mercenaries hired by the US government. Trump, who is obviously very anti-war, very Christ-like, pardoned these men after then Vice President Joe Biden led the charge to prosecute them. There's also several other instances of Trump pardoning war criminals, but we're gonna have to move on because there's a lot to cover. Let's take a look at Trump's foreign policy record. Remember how I brought up Obama's drone program? This is something that rightfully has hurt his reputation. Now, Obama's proclivity for drone strikes is something that I see condemned fairly frequently from all sides of the political spectrum. But when I bring up the inconvenient fact that Donald Trump dramatically increased drone strikes, some sources claim by 432%, my fellow leftists remain consistent in their critique of US imperialism. But my friends on the right don't. In 2017, the Trump administration allowed the military to relax its rules of engagement for airstrikes in Afghanistan. This led to a 330% increase in civilian deaths compared to the Obama administration. Civilian casualties also surged in other regions. More civilians were killed in airstrikes in Somalia under Trump than under Obama and Bush combined. And airstrike deaths in Iraq and Syria rose by 200%. Again, this is not me defending Bush or Obama. I have no interest in doing so. I'm just pointing out how all of the things we agree were bad under Bush and Obama were often exacerbated under Trump. To dial in on the topic of Afghanistan, we know Trump alluded to withdrawing, but in actuality, he did the opposite. Mr. Anti-War sent approximately 4,000 extra troops to the country.
I think in terms of war, Trump was the best president of my lifetime.
Why?
Because he was getting our troops out.
This is a good jumping off point to tackle more of his horrible foreign policy in the Middle East. Not only was he not principally opposed to war and conflict, but his foreign policy decisions actively made the world a less peaceful place. In 2015, an accord called the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, also known as the Iran nuclear deal, was reached between Iran and several world powers, including the US. The deal stipulated that Iran denuclearize in exchange for sanctions relief. Iran, hitherto, had been economically decimated by sanctions and saw this deal as an ability to unfreeze some revenue. The US and its allies saw this as an opportunity to deter nuclear conflict in the region. Now, if you regularly watch my channel, odds are you're like me and don't think highly of American foreign policy in general, but I do think that preventing nuclear conflict is good for everyone. This deal was a success. Iran was building up its economy, and the threat of nuclear conflict was diminishing, as the International Atomic Energy Agency confirmed in 2016, only 1 year after the deal was enacted. Then came Trump. He withdrew from the deal and ultimately led Iran right back into their nuclearization program. Not only did Trump ruin this important foreign policy achievement, but his doing so pissed off Iran so much that the Ayatollah said, Trump's corpse will nourish worms and rodents, his body will be dust, but the Islamic Republic will be standing, stronger than ever. Probably safe to say this was bad diplomacy. Trump did not make the world any more peaceful with that one, but bad diplomacy is Donald Trump's middle name. Trump put his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, in charge of brokering peace in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, despite the fact that Kushner had no experience in the region, is biased towards Israel, and says things like this about Palestinians. The Trump administration's actions regarding Israel-Palestine were so demonstrably stupid that they served to further alienate Palestinians on the world stage and rightfully enrage them. The Trump administration moved the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. For those who may not be privy as to why this is a big deal, Jerusalem is contested Holy Land, and when Trump moved the American embassy and recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, Palestinians were not stoked. But this decision of Trump's, like almost all decisions of his, was motivated not by a desire for peace and diplomacy, but for political and monetary gain. One of Trump's biggest donors was a man named Sheldon Adelson, who funded Trump to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. So next time someone tells you that Trump is anti-establishment or whatever the talking point is, remind them that he is just as bought and paid for as the rest of them. Back to Sheldon. Mr. Adelson was a staunch Zionist and Republican mega-donor to whom Trump, 10 days before taking office, made a promise saying he would move the American embassy to Jerusalem. This move was nothing more than Trump satiating his base of pro-Israel donors and evangelical Zionists at the expense of any hope for peace in the region. Another example of Trump's detrimental foreign policy regarding the Israeli-Palestinian conflict were the Abraham Accords. These accords sought to normalize diplomatic relations between Israel and surrounding adversarial countries, which at face value sounds like a good thing until we realize that these accords purposefully ignore and sidestep the Palestinians. You can think of these accords as Israel making friends with its neighboring countries while simultaneously letting out a massive you to the Palestinians, leading them to feel even more isolated and forgotten. The Abraham Accords just added more fuel to the fire. A common sentiment among those familiar with the conflict is that these accords, in combination with moving the Israeli embassy, set the stage for the October 7th attack and subsequent bombardment of Gaza. Another example of Trump's impulsive and heedless attitude toward foreign policy comes in the form of his abandoning of Kurdish allies in northern Syria to die in a Turkish attack. A little context. The US military supported and fought with Kurdish forces in northern Syria to push back ISIS. The Kurds were a respected and useful ally. So we all thought. Historically, Turkey and the Kurds have had a rocky history, to put it lightly, and Turkey was waiting for American troops to leave the area so they could attack the Kurds without the risk of accidentally killing an American and starting a huge global conflict. After Trump took a phone call with Turkish President Erdogan, he decided to pull his troops out of the region and leave his former allies vulnerable. This abrupt withdrawal allowed for the Turkish military to follow through with their attack on the Kurds. Trump then went on to refer to his former Kurdish allies as, quote, no angels, and justified the Turkish attack by claiming that certain factions of Kurds are, quote, natural enemies of the Turks. And before you come at me and say, oh, well, he was just getting troops out of the Middle East, isn't that what leftists want? My answer to that would be yes, but Trump didn't do that. He abruptly pulled out the few troops in northern Syria that were preventing the Turks from killing the Kurds, and he left other troops all over the region to take their oil.
And then they say he left troops in Syria. You know what I did? I left troops to take the oil. I took the oil. The only troops I have are taking the oil. They're protecting the oil. I took over.
We're taking the oil. We're not taking the oil.
Well, maybe we will. Maybe we won't.
They're protecting the facility.
I don't know. Maybe we should take it.
This betrayal and absolute cowardice on the part of Trump sparked backlash not only from his political opposition, but from his own party. There's really too much history regarding this situation to cram it into this video, so for now, just know that although the US has a long history of using and abusing the Kurds, this sloppy pullout and loss of Kurdish life is entirely Trump's fault. But for now, let's move on to the grand finale, Trump's aiding and funding of genocide in Yemen. After the Houthis, a Shiite Muslim movement from northern Yemen, seized the Yemeni capital in 2014 and forced President Hadi out of power, Saudi Arabia became increasingly worried. The Saudis saw the Houthis as aligned with Iran, its regional rival, and grew concerned that Yemen could fall under Iranian influence. In 2015, a Saudi-led coalition of Gulf states, with logistical support from the US, launched a large-scale air campaign aimed at driving back the Houthis and restoring the Hadi government. Saudi Arabia enforced a blockade on Yemen, limiting imports on food, medicine, and fuel, creating a man-made famine. Many people refer to this humanitarian crisis as a genocide due to the unbelievable cost of civilian life. It's true that this situation started while Obama was president, but the way it was ramped up and supported by Trump is unconscionable. Trump committed to supporting the Saudis by selling them arms, bombs, and military equipment. He also sent his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, remember him from earlier, to broker arms deals with the Saudi government, which led to Jared's newly made private firm receiving a hefty investment of $2 billion from his new Saudi friends immediately after he left the White House. Little suspicious, but hey, Hunter Biden, am I right? Anyway, when Bernie Sanders and Mike Lee decided to push a bipartisan bill to stop US involvement in Saudi Arabia and prevent Trump from further aiding in this genocide, Donald Trump vetoed it after overseeing the war's deadliest and most violent year. Even Lindsey Graham was in favor of this bill. So yes, Donald Trump out-neoconned Lindsey Graham. Yikes. To wrap this up, Donnie is now flirting with the idea of bringing his war efforts to the Western Hemisphere. He threatened to designate Mexican cartels as terror organizations and bomb Mexico. Remember all that talk we just had about AUMFs and how the American war machine sugarcoats their war efforts by calling them authorizations for use of military force? Well, Republicans introduced a bill seeking an AUMF for Mexico. Jeez. Well, that's enough out of me. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up, comment, and subscribe. And if you hated it, give it a thumbs down, comment in a mean way, and still subscribe. Thanks.